and we jump right in, yeah? We have a very special day ahead of us, and we're probably going to do it in about 45 minutes or so, and it will likely feel like a day. Many occasions of import feel like that, yeah, high density. Hasina and I have the pleasure of introducing and walking through a conversation with a wonderful man who certainly knows density. So he can speak physics and astrochemistry, if I may create that, Steve. I don't even know if there is such a thing, but coming from the world of biochemistry, and I work in food as medicine dynamics and putting together all of the varieties of life in the human body. And you speak brilliantly about the varieties of life, not just what we think of as organic creatures, but the intercommunication and the dynamics of the intercooperation of the movements of the cosmos. So, astronomer, definitely a man who assembles things. I was so fortunate when the universe blessed me to meet you, and I heard your conversations, not just about the information itself. And I prefaced this, with my my bias as a scientist, wanting the moving parts. And I think we're certainly going to hear plenty of moving parts. And if you guys want to know the nuts and bolts of the science, this man can definitely, he's the one to go to. He leads astronomy, stargazing sessions, and teaches kids and talks to people in plain terms about some pretty complicated things, that most of us don't even know about. So I'm going to stop babbling, Steve, and let you touch the tip of the iceberg. I also admire you for wanting to be a philosopher. I lied, by the way, just now. I'm not going to stop babbling. I heard an interview of yours where you described your book as an emergent phenomena, as the collection of 1/3 scientists and 1/3 philosophers and 1/3 culturalists. And the permission, I think, is a good word that you give to let life show up on its own terms, and like that. I wanted to read a testimony, and Steve's website is, one of Steve's websites is Cosmic Conversations. And I think this quote's a good way to start, from Glenn Hartelius, who is Dr. Glenn, co-editor of the International Journal of Transpersonal Studies. And he says, Cosmic Conversations, which Steve published in 2010, by the way, Cosmic Conversations offers the reader a chance to eavesdrop on a handful of deeply satisfying conversations that mesmerize, stimulate, and entertain at the same time. If science were a jungle, Steve Martin would be the Harrison Ford character you'd want by your side. He serves as an eloquent but tough-minded guide through the complexities of some of the most compelling cutting-edge ideas about who we are and what kind of world we live in. This is a daring book and a great read. And you are a daring man and a great listen, but only if I stop talking. So, Steve Martin from Asheville, North Carolina.
Thank you, Tom. That's a great introduction. Yeah, it's like, where to begin? It's like, well, begin where we are, because the universe is an ongoing process. And I'm kind of aligning with Brian Swim. And if you haven't, seen his book, Cosmogenesis, you can't quite see it here because it's blurred out, but his latest book is Cosmogenesis. And in the book, he talks about the process of autocosmology. And autocosmology is the idea that in telling our own story, we're in some way telling the story of the universe. Because the bottom line is we are all universe, right? Evolving, connecting, emerging in a collective field that's been happening for 13.8 billion years. And so each of our stories is part of a larger story. It's the expression of this larger story. And so it shares the properties of this larger cosmic dynamic that we're a part of. And so when you mentioned cosmic conversations, like my first book, which is 10 12 years ago now, the book emerged kind of organically a few years before that. And I'll just give people the thumbnail sketch. Is I had this sudden realization that I'd studied the universe my whole life as an astronomer, and I still had no idea what it is. I mean, that's a big blow. I mean, to kind of have that hit you in the face, like, oh, I'm supposedly an expert on this thing called the universe, and I still have no idea what it is, right? Is it spirit? Is it matter? Is it energy? Is it random? Is it intelligent? And so I figured, well, if I don't know, in my now naive thinking, I'll go ask some other people and see what they say about it. So I interviewed 18 people in different fields, and as Tom said, I interviewed cutting edge scientists and quantum physicists. I interviewed indigenous elders and healers. I interviewed cultural creatives, all kinds of people in different fields, and we asked the question, "What is the universe?" in each one of these interviews. Now, it's important that these weren't traditional interviews. I wanted them to be dialogues. I wanted to be a two-way conversation of discovery, so that in our conversations, where there's an exchange and there's a give and take, and there's a collective emergence, something new comes out. This was really important for me because I wanted to model a new way of engaging with the universe, that of dialogue and collective emergence. And so in every one of the interviews or every one of the dialogues I had, I was a different person afterwards. It wasn't just that I discovered all kinds of amazing facts about the universe and insights, which I did, but the process itself was transformative. This process of engaging in collective emergence together, this process of having dialogues, of finding out something through our interactivity that's new and emergent and creative. That's what really struck me, and that's what I was modeling in the book. And since then, I've had book clubs, come and reach out to me and say, "Hey, can you lead us into cosmic conversation?" Because I wanted to empower people to have their own cosmic conversations. It's like, get together in your living room and start talking about the universe. It's like, well, what do you think it is? What do you think it is? And that leads to all kinds of interesting questions and interesting expressions that people haven't explored before, because everyone is an expert on the universe. Everyone is the leading edge of a 13.8 billion year creative process. And so I really want to kind of level the playing field and not say, well, astronomers are the experts, or the physicists are the experts on the universe. No, we're all experts on the universe from our own particular subjectivity, because we are the universe. And so when we get together in this kind of collective intention, we can allow the universe's space to produce something new, for something to emerge together. And it's something that I think we really need at this time, is this kind of coming together for collective emergence. There's so much kind of division and deciding, well, I'm right, you're wrong, from a fixed position. But remember, the universe doesn't have any fixed positions. It's always on a journey. And so how can we continue the journey moving? How can we continue the journey as a collaborative journey with ourselves, with each other, with the natural world and the stars around us? That's what I want to help facilitate. And that's what I'm passionate about, is facilitating that collaborative journey between humans and each other, humans in the natural world, humans in the cosmos and the stars and galaxies outside of that. So that's how the book grew, is out of this kind of collaborative emergence. And I think it's a really useful model to kind of offer our culture at this time.
I love that. The collaborative emergence. And just going back to the whole Harrison Ford jungle analogy in that wonderful testimony, what it got me thinking about is that, when we speak our truth, when we bring what emerges from us to the conversation, we liberate others to do the same, to bring their individuality to the table. And I want to get into So how did this emerge from you? Because your journey is going to liberate other people to really follow their path, to go within and see what motivated them, what inspired them to be able, what inspires them to be able to follow their path. So when one talks about cosmology, consciousness, science, firstly, it's a very unusual path to follow. Just to start there, consciousness is not something people usually think, okay, I'll go study consciousness. And then just to marry the science and the consciousness, spirituality, that is still another leap to another level. So I'd love to know that journey for you.
Well, I'd love to share more about it, Hasina, but I also want to affirm your own work as a breakthrough coach and inspiring people to tell the truth, because in that you're enacting the dynamics of the cosmos. One thing Thomas Berry, who's, for people who don't know, he's a well-known theologian, but he worked on a field of emergent knowledge called the New Cosmology. Thomas Berry and Brian Swimme are two big names in that field. And Thomas Berry said that the universe has three particular aims that it's aiming at with its activities. It's aiming at greater differentiation, that is creating unique centers of evolution. So people are becoming their unique selves. It's aiming at deepening subjectivity, which is deepening our own perspective, our own interiority, our own capacity for self-reflection in our own place of being. And it's aiming at increasing communion, which is greater interrelatedness and intimacy between all the different parts and the parts in the whole. And so these three different themes are what the universe is aiming at. And so Hasina, in your work, you're really helping facilitate people's differentiation and also their subjectivity. It's like, can I stand in my truth and own it fully, right, as my unique truth and expression of who I am in the world? And when people do that, they are weaving themselves into the larger framework of the universe in a very profound way that I don't think people really appreciate, because that's what the universe is seeking to do, is to enact each person's expression of their own unique truth, their own unique perspective, and to do that in a community of belonging. And so, Hasina, what you're doing is creating communities of truth-telling, of people standing on their own truth. It's like, this is my truth and this is how it is, and having each other be a reflector for that. So I just want to affirm, Hasina, what you shared is really enacting the dynamics of the universe, right? It's increasing differentiation, subjectivity, and communion. Now, in terms of my own life, and I think people can reflect on this for themselves, is my own life has been the process of differentiation, subjectivity, and communion for myself. Because I began with a very traditional education, with undergraduate and graduate school in astronomy and physics and research, and working at NASA and for the Hubble Space Telescope, and teaching college courses on astronomy and cosmology. And so that was very much a traditional role. And yet I was also interested in the bigger questions, interested in, well, where do we come from? What's the meaning? Right. So I almost minored in philosophy in undergraduate college, but I had to take too many math courses, so I couldn't quite fit it in. But I always, had that passion for the deeper questions. So my interest has always been in doing framework within a larger human context of asking deep questions. So even though I'm involved in research, I want to, know the hard science and the discovery process, I love the process of discovery. I love the process of collaboration and research, where we're discovering together something new that's never been known before. It's just thrilling, right? And whether this discovery process is taking place through the telescope, or it's taking place through a deep meditation retreat, or it's taking place through interesting conversations, there's an emergence happening. And once again, we're back to that theme of collective emergence, right? So with astronomical research, you're collaborating with other astronomers or other scientists, but you're also collaborating with the universe, right? You're saying to the universe, I want to know more about you. I want to have a personal connection. I want something, I want to discover something new. So in this way, I always felt I had a personal connection with the universe. There's always something I was relating to that was kind of more than what I could say it was. But there was such an excitement of kind of being on the edge of discovery that is always very enlivening for me. So But I also felt that I wanted to make a contribution to something larger. And Brian Swimm's work struck me very, very deeply with this. Someone handed me a book called The Universe is a Green Dragon, which he wrote in the 1980s. It's a wonderful book. And it struck me that here was a scientist, here was an astronomer, a cosmologist, who had a deep heart. He wanted to be of service, right? And I felt that resonate with me. It's like, okay, I'm teaching in an academic format. I'm inspiring students. They're going on to, do all kinds of inspired things. And yet I want to be of service to the larger Earth community, because I was becoming aware, or is dawning my awareness, that we're in a great species extinction right now. It's like, species are disappearing all around the planet as a result of human activity. And so I asked myself professionally as an astronomer, how can I be of service? How can I help this? And part of what I know my gifts are, this is part of my own differentiation, is I'm a visionary, right? I'm someone who can communicate a larger vision of humanity, of people's lives, and their sense of belonging to something larger. And so my work has always been, and I can see this through the thread of my life as I look back, has always been connecting the personal and the cosmic, of showing people that they're connected to something larger. Because I feel one of the biggest drivers of the environmental devastation and cultural injustice and all the different isms around the world is some feeling of separateness. And if we can show that we're not separate from the universe, we're not separate from each other, we're not separate from our environment, then we have a larger paradigm that we're working in. We have a larger sense of identity and activity and connection and contribution, so that people are the expression of a larger whole and they're contributing to something larger. And so I wanted that. And so it naturally kind of drew me in that direction. And after I found out about Brian Swimm's work, I quit my fancy university job. I went back to becoming a poor graduate student in California to study with him. And it was after studying with him that this book, Cosmic Conversations, emerged. So it was an organic process, but of course, there are lots of twists and turns and learnings along the way, and awakenings and changes of context. But I wouldn't trade it for anything. It's been an incredible ride. And the idea of Harrison Ford is a great one, because a lot of times it feels like I'm hacking through the jungle and I can't see which way I'm going, but I'm hacking forward anyway, just trusting the journey itself. Looking for that vista where I'd see, oh, well, there's the mountaintop we're trying to get to. But no, it's all jungle, right? But I know I'm on the right path because I can see the next footstep. And that's enough, right? And that shows me the next footstep when I hack my way through that. So maybe a lot of people can identify with kind of being in a jungle and kind of hacking their way. And it's not a linear path. It's not like, oh, that's where we're going, let's aim for that. No, we're finding our way through the jungle together. And that's part of what life is. It's a collaborative emergence. We don't get the clear picture generally. Some of us do, but for most of us, we're just hacking away. But we're following these threads of greater differentiation, deepening subjectivity, and greater interweaving of communion. So those are just some highlights, but I want to make room for Tom and Hasina, your contributions too. So let's see how that's landing with you.
Yeah, it's gorgeous and inspiring, and I feel like I just took a minor in philosophy. I think you're a beautiful illustration too of somebody who follows their heart, and kudos to you, really, right? And people are terrified to do that. I think the silver lining from the past couple of years is that, almost like an alcoholic hitting bottom, knowing what's missing, is we are rebounding with incredible power back into the participation dynamics, right? Yeah. And I love your perspective about you honor the multiple perspectives. And when you talk about allurements and the collective, if you will, the collective honoring, if there is such a thing, right? Think of maybe even a fractal or a holographic sense of honor. You can confer that as a healthy being. You can confer that on the people you're speaking with, right? Yeah. And you can help me finish my sentences in a way that actually is constructive and meaningful, right? In that, I wanted to ask you about how your personal, well, let me throw one more piece in there. So we get to honor our own, quote, flawed perspectives as well, right? Each of us has chapters of our lives that we wish, And without disrespecting the previous self, we can honor where we have gone wayward, right?
Yeah.
And I'm not suggesting at all that you made any mistakes at all in the book or that you went wayward. It's a gorgeous presentation, but I'm wondering, in that 10 years of post publication, you mentioned you had a lot of different ways to have conversations with people and whatnot. Could you put all that together and suggest what you personally learned? I'd like to hear, what happened as you were doing your hack through the jungle, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And what your wish would be now for that, after we've all been put in our camps here for the past couple of years. What's the flip side of that?
Can you say more about that last part? What's the flip side of which part?
What's the flip side of having been constricted, and maybe even not constricted as an exogenous handcuff, but we can see how we gave away personal sovereignty, I think, over the past century plus, and it's a big piece of my life these days to help people realize they don't have to call themselves victims because they made a mistake yesterday by not paying attention to something, right? That's the ecosystem that we grow up in. That's the terrain that we grow up in, and we're incentivized to give away our personal choice making, right? And personally, it's important for me to put people in a place of top well-being so they can make good decisions, and Hasina as well, and all of these, everybody here, and all of these collective consciousness advocacy transformational type gatherings.
Yeah.
So without demonizing the me of yesterday, how do I go forward, right?
Well, I mean, just to simply acknowledge that you weren't making a mistake, you were simply making a choice based on what you knew at the time. And what you know is always emerging. It's not like, oh, I'm suddenly going to be enlightened and then I'm going to make better choices. But you're becoming a different person through the choices that you're making. And the choices are creating the person who you are now. So it's not like you just say, oh, I can go back there and change those choices, because those choices led to you being the magnificent you that you are right now in this moment. So clearly something worked well, even in what we call the so-called mistakes. Right? Because if we think about our lives as being some subset of the universe, like, well, what mistakes did the universe make in 13.8 billion years? Like, well, you can say, well, maybe they shouldn't, maybe the universe shouldn't have invented this or that species. It didn't last very long. But the universe is experimenting. It's trying out new things. It's trying out all the different possibilities. And that includes, making choices which we would later feel are mistakes. But these are simply choices. These are ways of enacting the universe's potentiality in a given situation. And hopefully we can learn from those and gain some wisdom and maybe get a little bit better navigational guidance for the next time around. Because when we do that, then the universe has learned something too. It's never had the experience of living its life as Tom or Hasina or Steve before. So clearly it doesn't know how it's supposed to turn out. It's discovering it, or we're discovering it through our living. And so that's a very enlivening perspective for me. It's like, oh, the universe has never had this conversation before. What's going to emerge from this? And so if we can kind of let the self-judgment go and kind of enjoy the ride and pay attention to what's emerging and also what's deepening and also the connections that are interweaving, then I think that's being of service in a larger way. And Tom, you point out a really great, you make a really good point, both in what you just said, but also with your work, right? In functional and integrative medicine. It's like, we can't get well on our own. There's no such thing as a healthy patient in isolation, right? Health is a matter of well-being in relationality with a larger context and larger whole. And so humanity, if you think about humanity as a patient, humanity can't get well by itself. It can't get well without, a flourishing relationship with the natural world, with the earth systems that we're embedded in. So you can't separate out, as modern science has tried to do, and Western medicine has tried to do. It's like, well, here's the patient, here are the symptoms. Let's address the symptoms. Well, why not just address the underlying dysfunction of separation? And maybe by connecting that patient or that situation to a greater sense of wholeness, then the intelligence of the universe will come in and begin to restore that system of balance. I mean, this is very much what indigenous peoples have done for many years, is if someone is sick, the treatment isn't necessarily medicine or herbs, although it's part of it, but it's reconnection. It's reconnection to community, it's reconnection to spirit, it's reconnection to earth, it's reconnection to the larger whole. So when we're connected to the larger whole, the whole knows how to do wholeness. So by connecting to the greater sense of wholeness, then automatically that part which is out of balance, which could be a broken ankle or a broken heart, is naturally drawn into kind of the harmonic vibrational resonance with that larger wholeness. And so it's about reconnection, right, as a way forward. So I love how this is bringing together, Tom, your work in medicine and my work in cosmology, and Hasina, your work with breakthrough coaching and all the inspiring initiatives you're doing, because it's about returning to a greater sense of wholeness, not just for ourselves, but together. It's like, what's the wholeness of us together? And it's together in this context, and it's the wholeness of what's the togetherness in the conversations people will have after this. And when we go for a walk in our neighborhoods, what's the wholeness of the togetherness of this? It's being sensitive to that space of emergent togetherness that the universe is aiming at, right? Because the universe is the largest context that's always whole. And as that, it's always trying to create wholeness in every situation. And part of the trick, or part of the activity, is how can I set up my life or any given situation so that the greater wholeness can come forth in that situation? Because that's the self-organizing dynamics of the universe waiting to break through into that situation. And I'll just give an example. I don't think my wife will mind about this. She's a transpersonal psychologist. And so she works with people who are in spiritual crisis. And she gave a case example of someone who was in spiritual crisis. And this happens a lot. And she basically was just with them, just listening, being a reflecting place, being a safe place for them to express and rage and go through all of what they were experiencing in that moment. And what happened is they began to calm down and they began to have insights. And they said, oh, I need to be doing this. Oh, I need to be doing that. And all she did was she created a space for them to express their crisis and trusting that the self-emergence will come from them. She didn't do anything. She wasn't the source of healing for them, but she created the conditions for that person's own self-organizing wholeness capacity to come forth. And so if we can create situations for that to happen in our lives and in our relationships, I think we can be serving that larger wholeness in any given situation. What do you all think? I see you nodding your heads.
We're fond of believing that we need to actually to construct something, right? Come up with an intervention, come up with a technique, come up with a and I'm hearing that part of the participation on the whole, the level of the whole, is what you pointed to before, which is I don't know yet. And it's a very that again is a very healthy place, right? If you're in a space of scarcity, you can't get there. If you're in a space of abundance and connection and community and tribe and sufficiency, then the I don't know yet is really the only real answer. Yeah.
Right. Well, and we're used to kind of seeing the experts as being out there. It's like, oh, I need to go see this practitioner, or I need to go see this person, or I need to go see this person, as if they have the authority on what you need. One of the biggest insights for people to grasp is that each of us is a place where the universe seeks to self-organize itself in its wholeness. We're so used to thinking, and this is the old paradigm. It's like, back 100 years ago, we thought the center of the universe was over there, right? Maybe it's the center of the galaxy, 28,000 light years in that direction, or maybe it's, there, Washington, D.C., which is the center of government for the US, or maybe it's the town hall there. That's the center of organization. But what we know about the universe in the 20th century is that the universe is omnicentric. And this comes out in my book. Every one of us is a place where the dynamics in the center of the universe is activating from. So this place right here is where the universe is expressing itself as a center for its own activity. And so is there, and so is there. So you know how people kind of get hung up with themselves, like, oh, they think they're the center of the universe. Well, they're right, but they're only a center. You're the center of the universe too, and so is that hummingbird, and so is the redwood forest, and so is, you know, the space between us. So when we see that we're a place where the universe is seeking to emerge, then of course we're the authority on what's emerging in that place, right? And this is, Hasina, where your work comes in. It's like, well, what's the truth that's emerging through me in this moment? Because that's not just your truth, that's a cosmic truth through this particular perspective. And that needs to be valued and cherished and held and aligned with. So that's the biggest thing for people to get, is that we live in a universe that's omnicentric, and each of them is a center, not the center, but a center where the universe is coming forward in a fresh, new, creative, generative way. Once people get the sense of that, it's tremendously empowering. I mean, when you can align with that, you've got 13.8 billion years of cosmic evolution behind you. What, you know, how could you not fail? You know, when you feel that empowerment of the universe coming through this location, and the reverence you feel for the other person or that other being, that's where 13.8 billion years of wisdom is coming through as well. What can I learn from them? What can I learn from this difficult conversation, from this person I don't even like, but they're speaking wisdom? How can I listen to that? Or this redwood forest, or whatever the context is. How can we allow that collective cosmic wisdom to come through?
Your languaging is so amazing. This is the one thing that I feel I learned most from you at Deeptime, in the Deeptime Leadership course, when I came in and I said, well, you see, I don't know this terminology. And you said that, well, the terminology is always changing. When we find, as we find better language, then, you know, that evolves. So it doesn't mean there's static terminology, which is just mind-blowing to everything else that's out there. But the languaging you were using, it just showed that we give people the or we empower them to not only see their personal sovereignty, but to claim it and to know who they are. And yes, it is an empowering sense. And then here's a technique that I just got. I was writing it down. Why not replace I or me with the universe? Like if you going to judge yourself harshly and you say, I made a mistake, replace it with the universe. Is that what you really think? And it's a great way of just bringing that in. Like, how would you describe the universe? Why not give ourselves that same gift?
I love that, Hasina.
Mm.
And it's also brilliant that you came up with your own technique for kind of shifting yourself into that space. And this is what we need, is for people to kind of self-generate practices that bring them into alignment with what they already know, or this larger perspective. So I love that you're doing that already, Hasina. And also what you spoke about is you found the language a little bit maybe unfamiliar to start, but you found a way to make it your own. I think that's just so valuable, to kind of not take someone else's language, but to find out, well, how is this for me? How would I express this in my life? What makes sense? You know, when Steve talks about context, and he talks about, well, every context being a particular wholeness of the universe, how do I know that in my own life with my own language? And maybe it's a poem, or maybe it's a picture you've drawn. It doesn't have to be words, but you can say, well, this is how I know it. This is what that means to me. So I'm a big fan of words, but I'm also a big fan of gestures, creative expressions, nonverbal, whatever wants to come through that represents that sense of knowing that for your own, in your own way. I would certainly highlight that and affirm that. And Hasina, I'm also interested in, Tom, you too, in your journey with the Deeptime Leadership Program, because I'd like to talk about that just briefly as a model for people that I think is really emergent and helpful at this time. And the program itself is built around the process of allurement. Right? So allurement is this term that Brian Swim kind of recoined in a new context with what is that kind of primordial desire that we have in our heart? What's our heart's desire? What would we love to kind of enact in the world? What's alive in us and brings us alive fully? You could say it's what's my calling? What's my cosmic task? Lots of different words for it, but what is that which I wish to bring out into the world in the service of something larger? So if we begin with that sense of allurement, and Hasina, you would ask the question initially before our interview is how can we revision education? We can revision education by having it be around allurement rather than a standardized body of knowledge, right? Or maybe we have, a certain set of goals for students, but we have it, enacted within their particular allurements. It's like, well, what's alive in you? What brings you alive? What's your gift? And can we create the circumstances for you to bring that gift out into the world? And so what we do in the Deeptime Leadership Program is we invite people to tune into their allurement, right? What is their deepest desire? What would they love to see enacted in the world? And then we ask them, well, what's the context for that? It's like, what's the larger circumstances in which that's taking place? We recognize that expression is part of the activity of the universe. So it's a subset of the universe, but what's the community in which that's taking place in? It's like, well, it might be my workspace, or it might be my creative life. What's the context? And then we ask, well, what's the matrix of that? What's the set of relationships that allurement is enacting in? Because allurement, of course, is never in a vacuum. It's always within a web of relationality, because the universe is not a collection of objects, but it's a web of relationality. And so we ask, well, what's the matrix of your allurement? So, well, I would love to connect, my creative work with this group of people or these types of people. It's like, okay, that's your community. So once again, you've got your field of action, you've got your community, right? You've got your cheerleading squad, you've got the people you're going to be working with. And then what's the subjectivity? Subjectivity means what's the particular perspective of both yourself in terms of how does it feel to be alive in your allurement, and how does your allurement impact others, knowing that expressing your own heart's desire impacts others and inspires them, as you said, Hasina. And also what's their feeling of receiving your allurement or of what you're offering them, right? And what is their needs as well? So can we take in the needs of the whole in our deliberations? And then finally, what is the cosmically sourced action that wants to naturally become evoked once you've taken into account these other three principles? So it's a leadership process by which we take people's allurement or invite them to bring their allurement forward, and we bring it forward in receptive community. So it's a model of leadership where everyone is a self-generating center of bringing forth their own allurement for the benefit of the whole. It's a process, but it's something that people can take to their lives and begin enacting. So I think if you start with allurement and you create communities around allurement, you're naturally creating a community that benefits the whole.
And again, throughout time, that's the way it's been. Yeah. And then a structured, do you have a part two to your answer about the education? Because what you're doing with the Deeptime Leadership Network and what countless others around the world are doing, that feels like the future of education. Yeah.
I think so. And I think it's happening in lots of different ways in lots of different places. I mean, the Deeptime Network is an online leadership program, so it has a particular framework and context for that. But people are doing this in Montessori schools, and they're doing this at different, eco-spirituality centers, and they're doing this all kinds of different ways in different places. But it begins with this allurement. It begins with this desire to, be the change we want to see in the world, and then to create the supportive community around which to enact people's collective desires in a real on-the-ground way. And from there, it grows organically. We can't give a formula for how it's going to be because it's an emergent process. And you discover the next step in community with people's allurements. So in that sense, it's descriptive without being proscriptive. You can't say, well, you do A plus B and that leads to C. It's like, well, no, you just try this out, being in collective community, and see what happens. Now, the other thing is you can't fail because the universe is aiming at greater differentiation, deepening subjectivity, and deepening communion. So if you've come together with your own heart's desire with other people in a collective relational community, you've done the work of the universe already. You've deepened its connection with itself in community. That's it, right? You've already won, right? So
Beautiful.
don't you forget about it being a project, which is very, very much the Western society. Like, oh, I have to do this project and get this thing done. And here's my task list and how we do it. No, it's a collective emergence of being in relationship together and allowing the creativity to come forth in a new way. And then we do that again, and we do that again. And then the future emerges in its wholeness that includes everyone and everything, because it's all part of our matrix of emergence and a matrix of our allurement. So automatically, you've done away with the hierarchy and the traditional models of how we get things done and we pass these laws and all this stuff. Not that that's important, but it's an emergent model that happens in collaboration with community and the universe itself. And this includes the Earth community. It's like, well, what's best for this redwood forest, with respect to my allurement? Can I use that in making decisions? Right? Can I use that in making everyday life choices? Right? What's going to support the whole in the most resonant way possible in terms of what I know now, knowing that I don't know everything. Right? I have a limited scope of knowledge at this point, and I'm acting from that as best I can. But my heart intention is good, and is there in that direction of increasing differentiation, subjectivity, and communion.
It's a kind of spiritual courage that emerges in community, isn't it? That people are afraid right now, and it's because of generations of being educated into a build it, get it right, be right paradigm that you were describing. And there's this conversation in itself, I think, the very illustration of conversational dynamic as the exploration, as the forest that you're hacking through. That's an ethic, I think, that even we've been separated from it. It's foreign to us in many ways. And then we get around the campfire, we remember it sort of primally, and we say, why isn't all of the planet like this, right?
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, boom, you show up. People like that are just, you're in the right place at the right time, all right?
Yeah.
So I think what I'm saying is, you are a deliverable, you are a conversational ethic, as much as you are, a scientist and the particulars of your specialty and your knowledge and whatnot. And that's to be applauded.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
And I love that our conversation is emergent, right? That we're kind of reflecting off each other. We're not just answering questions, but we're reflecting, and we're being impacted and affected by our relating too, because that's important. Teilhard had this amazing vision, and Teilhard's a philosopher was very inspiring for Brian Swim and Thomas Berry, of the emergence of a noosphere, right? A new sphere of the earth, which is the expression of kind of the flowering of human consciousness in a way that's benefiting the whole. And noosphere often gets translated to a sphere of mind, because nous is the the ancient Greek word for mind, but that's a very different type of mind. It's a very holistic, inclusive mind. And the noosphere that Teilhard was talking about, and I like to emphasize this point, is also the emergence of a global heart. It's not just a greater cognitive functioning, which is what AI and the internet is kind of aspiring to, is a greater web of knowledge and interconnectedness, which is fine that way. But what's also emerging now is a sense of global heart, right? A sense of community care, right? A care for the whole of things. And when that heart begins to develop, I think it happens in all kinds of different places around the world, and we begin to feel it, right? It begins to become a field that begins to evoke our individual hearts to come forward in a new way. And so when we talk about allurement, that's a very precious thing for someone to share. It's like, oh, this is what's really deep inside my heart that I want to express. And so I think we need to really be tender with that in the beginning, and to begin to create these maybe emergence communities, right? Who are the people that you want to be in relationship with and hold each other's heart's desire. Because in the beginning, it's a very tender shoot and it needs that kind of gentle support. So, can we find a group of trusted friends or find some kind of cohort or situation where we can be real, where we can have these deeper conversations for things that matter, where we can be supports for each other's tender hearts as they emerge, right? It's not for, the rough and tumble of the city streets, not just yet, but in the beginning, just to find those places. And it might be in people's therapy office, it might be in their journals, it might, be with their most intimate friends, but it begins there with kind of sharing each other's hearts and dreams and desires. And then it grows from there. But I think, in the beginning, it's important to be tender with yourself because, our heart has been privileged in our educational system. It's what we know, and how can we shine our minds forward? But what about what our hearts want to express? That's the heart knows wholeness in the way that the mind doesn't always recognize. So I think what you all are doing as well is calling for a new form of education that includes the heart and the body, right? The whole field of somatic knowing, because our bodies know so much more than the rest of us does. And Tom, you work with bodies all the time, so you have a sense of the wisdom and intelligence of what bodies know. Right? They know the way forward to heal if we can just kind of facilitate that. So it's really about bringing body, heart, and mind together in a resonant field with other like-minded community, and then from there branching out to larger communities and other contexts.
Beautiful. You reminded me that I forgot, because since we know this community very deeply through our work with Peace Week, and when Hasina and I put our convergence room together last fall, we called it Humanity as Organism Thrives. And the simple statement we had lots of stuff that we could talk about, as we all do. I'd like to just read our mission statement, though. When we as aligned individuals bring our individual strengths to the table, we become a whole that is greater than the sum of the parts. Where we are connected, we are well. And there's not very much in there. And I had some funny conversations about, there's not very much in there that anybody can talk about. There's not very much in there that they're going to be inspired on the surface about and say, oh, I've been looking for that. I need to go. But the deeper you go into that, what did you call it? The heart has a dignity. The heart has it
has a sense of wholeness that
you used a word that was dignity with permission, sort of interesting. I can't come up with the word.
Yeah.
But and maybe I'm not supposed to. I wanted to invite anybody else who wants to ask a question. If you want to type a question in the chat, or if you want to hop on and ask a question, feel free.
Yeah. Well, and while they're doing that, I want to really just reflect back your mission statement, because it's so powerful. Because when we bring our strengths together, right, our strengths or our gifts or our allurements together, then we are well. And that last phrase is so important. We are well, right? It's not like I am well, but we are well together, right? Our wellness is kind of a function of how much we-ness is in our life. So
Amen. I love that.
Yeah, I don't get well, but we get well together. So healing happens in community. Healing happens in relationality.
Amen.
The foot doesn't heal by itself without being connected to the rest of the body. So I love the we. Yeah.
Yeah. The company that we put together that owned the yoga studios was called All Is Well, Centers for Mind and Body Integrity.
Beautiful.
And that's something to remind ourselves. All is ever.
Yeah. And the all is always well, because it's the source of wellness. It's the wholeness that infuses the parts. So when we're connected to the all, then we are restored to wholeness and wellness.
Thank you.
Just beautiful. Tom, thank you for doing that in the world. Creating these spaces for, yoga and wellness.
Thank you.
Such a gift.
Tara's out there creating some magic on the planet too.
Oh, yes, Tara, let's hear from you. I see your hand.
So I just have to start by saying I mean, you are always so generous in your affirmations, Steve, of life in each person as they express. I'm always struck by that. And that to me is part of what you're talking about in the wholeness. My question is around when earlier you had said the idea of the universe, one could maybe assess that the universe made a mistake by a species that didn't exist for very long. But it seems like any of those judgments would be coming from the personal egoic self.
Yeah.
Because even in that example, that mistake could only be judged a mistake if it was being judged on the parameters of time or specific usefulness from a very limited vantage point, right? So in the context of that species lasting the shortest of time, what that doesn't account for is what it served in the totality of the universe and that interconnectivity, right?
You're so right. Yeah.
Okay, so can you say a little bit about discernment? Because I feel so wholehearted in what you're coming forward with in terms of the holism and the allurements. And there are lots of conditionings that culturally have taken us away from ourselves, and it could be cases of mistaken identity in some ways. So can you speak a little bit about discernment or how someone trues up to what really is an allurement versus the conditioned, habituated way of doing something that's a repeat dynamic that's really, even though that too serves some purpose, it's in the whole, but do you know what I'm asking?
Yeah,
kind of.
yeah, it's a great question, and it has to do with this other fundamental property of the universe, is that the universe is fundamentally creative, generative, and self-organizing. And so does this allurement increase my generative creativity? Does it bring me more alive into my creativity? Right. So fundamentally at the core of the universe is creativity. We live in a creative universe. I mean, you look around us, there's 10 million species, flourishing around us. Clearly it's a creative matrix that we're involved in. And so part of the question of allurement is this a place where my creativity comes alive? Because Tara, I think you're an artist, right?
No, I'm a coach, and I was a nurse, a coach, and integral and somatic coach. So, but it's interesting when you're saying that. Then, so from the individual perspective, as each person attunes to the allurement, then we're talking about the collectivity, the collective whole. There's something about also attuning to the resonance or the coherence of the intersubjectivity. So can you say a little bit about how that might alter someone's direction, or maybe sort of the hacking through because I guess what I'm just seeing right now is that it's that someone not be so attached to the allurement that becomes something that's not an allurement anymore. It becomes too fixated, because in the intersubjectivity, the direction or the path may change, correct?
Absolutely. And allurement may change. I mean, allurement is a process as much as anything else. It's not like, oh, I was born to be on the stage. It's like, well, no, I'm born to express myself in this way. And that can shift depending on the context and depending on, people's life stages and their growth. So yeah, give yourself permission for your allurement to change. And the question is, where is my allurement now? What am I naturally drawn to now? And where do I want to resonate with now? So it's like where we resonate with is where we come alive. And Hasina and Tara, this when you're working with coaching clients. It's like, where am I coming alive in a new way now? That's the leading edge, especially that new edge for people, where it's a little bit scary, but it's also very exciting, and supporting them on being on that tightrope walking of that edge, because that's the aliveness. That's being on the very creative edge of what's emerging for them. And so tuning into that. It's like, where's my creativity focus now is one way of saying it. What am I naturally being drawn to right now? Right? What was my allurement? Where am I kind of co-resonating or coming alive in a new way? And then that's where you kind of put your energy. It's like deepen into that right now, and then just keep listening, because it might be different day to day. But that's the way of kind of tuning into the guidance. And the two of you are offering, such a gift for people to create that resonance space for people to come into their own aliveness and their own resonance. And I know you're listening for that as a coach and as a mentor, listening for that places where the energy wants to deepen. And a lot of times it's around their fear, right? It's like, oh, if I weren't afraid, I would do this.
Mhm.
And so it's a matter of kind of, being soft around that, but recognizing that sometimes their fear is standing on top of their greatest aliveness,
Mhm.
and supporting them and just taking that step that's needed to, with their fear, in relationship with their fear, not to overcome it or not to suppress it, but in relationship with their fear, because with the fear is the excitement that's wanting to come through too.
Thanks.
Does that answer your question, Tara?
Oh yeah, it's a lot. Thank you.
Yeah.
It's just like the fear has as much purpose, it's as much a gift as anything else. It's only through the darkness that we were able to really appreciate the light. And I say this as the light just came back on, so after load shedding.
Beautiful synchronicity.
Yep. But this
Yeah.
has been such an amazing conversation. And John had said to me beforehand, oh, there's probably going to be a part 2 to this. I agree with him. But the one thing I'm also going to say, and I think Tom, I can speak for you as well, that we were discussing the other day, oh, we have work to do, and that's not a negative thing. It's like we have work to do in the world. And we were discussing how everything, like you said, Steve, it takes place in community, like community healing, community conversations, not even so that we have to agree with each other, so that we can see from a different perspective. And these conversations are so important. So I'm thinking that we're probably going to start some sort of a conscious conversation thing where, we can all get together, and other people who are passionate about that as well, to be able to have these conversations. And it can help us, bottom line, where we are connected, which Tom always says we are well. So just,
Oh, I'm so glad
yeah,
to hear that. I mean, that is so needed. These places where people have conscious conversations, and I found that with the book because people had a million questions about the universe that they'd never really had the context to ask them for. And so when I got people together in a circle, it's like, well, let's talk about the universe. All of this excitement came out that, it's been bound up in them, from when they were a little kid. So it's like creating spaces and giving people permission to share what wants to become conscious in them. Because there's so much inside people that is just, striving to get out, but they don't know where to have the conversations. They don't have a context for it. So creating those spaces for these conversations to take place is not only healing, but it's inspiring, and it's really doing the work of the planet at this time. So thank you too for that initiative and creating those spaces.
One of the phrases I wrote down this morning that popped out from your website, your writings, was orient to wonder. And it's when you talk about folks in a little bit of abeyance or, disorganization, and we've all got that, and especially now. And sometimes what we can offer is just that little nudge to orient to wonder. And thank you for inspiring us and being that. And I echo Tara's words. Appreciate your generosity always and what you're doing out on the planet.
Thank you. And thank you for the invitation to join the conversation with you all. Yeah, I've been touched by it and really grateful to be able to have this conversation with you.
The cosmos wins.
Cosmos wins, right? The cosmos learned something today, right? And it's to be continued. Let's do it again sometime.
Amen.